Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Marissa Loeffler, Events and Marketing Specialist here at Barrows Real Estate Solutions, and I will be your moderator for today's session. To give you a little background, Barrows Real Estate Solutions, founded in 2001, is a recognized leader in empowering mission critical housing finance decisions. Through innovative technology, advanced data, and powerful analytics, Barrows helps support risk management and valuation accuracy across the mortgage industry. So, before we begin, just a few quick notes. To keep the focus on the content, the chat feature will be disabled during the presentation. However, you will still be able to submit a question. We will just answer any questions you have once the presentations are over. Also, a copy of today's presentation, along with a link to the full webinar recording and paper, will be emailed to all attendees following the session. So, let's go ahead and introduce our speakers. We're honored to be joined by two of Veris's top experts in housing analytics and economic research. First, we have Eric Fox, Veris's chief economist and senior vice president of analytics. Eric leads the development of our predictive modeling tools and brings deep expertise in housing trends, economic forecasting, and AVM performance. Joining Eric is Reena Agrawal, senior research economist here at Barrows. Reena specializes in real estate market analysis and valuation research, and she plays a huge key role in delivering the insights that power our industry leading solutions. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Reena, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
I will review three AVM testing approaches: purchase transaction testing, refinance HELOC appraisal testing, and pre-MLS listing testing. With respect to the last approach, there is considerable debate in the industry about using MLS list price data in AVMs. I will talk about that as well, and why timing matters in terms of AVM valuations that are used for testing. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the interagency rule. The Quality Control Standards rule for AVMs directs institutions that engage in certain credit decisions to ensure the following set of 5 rules. Firstly, lenders and investors must have measures in place to ensure a high level of confidence in the value estimates generated by AVMs. Secondly, lenders and investors are required to establish safeguards to prevent data manipulation that could compromise the integrity of valuation outcomes. The third rule requires lenders and investors to establish mechanisms that identify and mitigate potential conflicts of interest in the valuation process. And to ensure the effectiveness and accuracy of AVMs, the fourth rule requires lenders and investors to conduct periodic random sample testing and reviews. And finally, lenders and investors are required to comply with applicable non-discrimination laws. Next slide. So the discussion in this webinar is centered around the fourth component of the interagency rule, that is conducting periodic random sample testing and reviews. So currently there is a lack of standardized testing, which can lead to increased costs, and it can exclude smaller lenders from leveraging AVMs effectively. So we need to discuss the following questions with respect to testing. What approach should be used to test an AVM? Should it depend on the AVM use case? What benchmark should be used to test the AVM against? And at what point in time should AVM values be taken for testing? So the aim of this discussion is to challenge long-held assumptions with respect to AVM testing, and also to explore what are the key strengths and weaknesses of some of the key testing approaches that exist today. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, I will talk about 3 testing approaches: purchase transactions testing, refinance appraisal testing, and finally pre-MLS listing testing. A key difference among these testing approaches is the data that AVM testers are allowed or precluded from AVMs before they are tested. So the main goal is to eliminate or mitigate the possibility that the AVM has the answer to the test before taking it. In purchase transactions testing, the benchmark against which an AVM's estimated value is compared to is a recent sales price. So in this type of testing, the aim is to determine how closely the AVM's estimated values match actual market prices. In refinance and HELOC transactions, there is no property sale that occurs. Therefore, appraised values serve as the benchmark for evaluating AVM accuracy. Here, testing assesses how well the AVM performs in situations where a homeowner is seeking to refinance the existing mortgage or obtain a HELOC loan and therefore needs a valuation for the loan process. So today, refinances and HELOCs are the transactions that most often use AVMs. Pre-MLS listing testing of AVMs is a recent approach. Here, the benchmark is still the final sale price, but an AVM's valuation is taken before a property gets listed on the MLS so that AVMs do not have access to data on list prices. Beyond these 3 testing methods, there are additional approaches and benchmarks, but we will not be talking about those. Next slide, please. So first, I'll talk about purchase transactions testing. I briefly mentioned this in the previous slide. In this type of testing, the benchmark data against which an AVM is tested are almost always the recent closed sales prices. That means that the AVM estimate of a property just before it is sold is matched against the closed sales price of the property. So generally what happens is when AVM vendors are tested, they are sent a test file by a lending agency or a third-party tester, and this test contains a list of several properties that are pending contracts. They are typically collected over a month, and AVM vendors are expected to provide value estimates of these properties within a handful of days of receiving the test file. So this ensures that AVM vendors do not know the sales price in most cases, but some sales may close before the test files are returned. So vendors end up knowing the answer. The AVM values used here for comparison are recent values, and therefore they are meaningful estimates. This chart that you see here shows the P10 values and hit rates of various AVMs as tested by a major third-party tester at the national level in December 2024. P10 values are the percentage of time the AVM is within 10% of the benchmark value, and hit rate is the number of properties for which the AVM rendered a value divided by the total number of properties submitted. So in the chart, P10 is measured on the y-axis, hit rate is measured on the x-axis. So you want to be on the top right-hand corner so that you have the highest hit rate and the highest P10. And each blue dot represents a different AVM's P10 value and its hit rate. So what you see on the chart is a wide divergence between AVMs in terms of P10 values and hit rate. So what does this wide range of P10 going from 70% to 97% tell us? That despite similar access to data, there can be significant variations among vendors in terms of accuracy performance. And this could be due to the specific models constructed by the AVM modelers. It could be due to differing levels of model accuracy, or due to frequency of data updates. So frequent data updates, which could sometimes be daily updates, is also a crucial aspect of AVM development. And this should be considered a positive attribute because it can provide a performance advantage to AVM providers who implement such practices. So what this chart tells us is that even though most AVM vendors have similar building blocks, top AVM vendors will outperform others by significant amounts. So yes, in purchase transactions testing, there is the potential issue of some AVMs having access to some sales prices. But there are many lenders that may utilize a mitigating strategy for this. And they do this by identifying and removing properties from the test sample where AVMs have this information. And they often ask AVM vendors to provide data on the last sale price and sale date that they have for each property. So coming to refinance and HELOC appraisal testing, in these type of transactions, there is no property sale that occurs. So appraised values serve as the benchmark for testing AVM accuracy. I want to emphasize here that these are the transactions that often use AVMs. And in this testing approach, AVMs generally have a lower accuracy or lower P10 values when compared to purchase transactions testing. And P10 rates can be as much as 10 to 15% lower. So why is there this lower accuracy? This can result from several factors. For example, there is the absence of sales prices or list prices in these transactions, and also due to the possibility of errors in the benchmark appraisals themselves. The chart shows the P10 values and hit rates for several AVMs. Again, this was evaluated by a third-party blind test at the national level. The data shows that P10 values range from 60% to 82%. Again, even though all AVM vendors are subject to the same conditions, AVMs with the most accurate and robust models tend to outperform others in these type of testing scenarios. And as I said earlier, there are no sales prices in these transactions, so appraisals are used as benchmarks. And many large lenders consider appraisals as the gold standard. Next slide, please. So why do we need these different types of testing for an AVM? Because use case matters. Is the AVM primarily being used for purchase transactions? Or is it primarily being used for refinance HELOC transactions? Because if the AVM is primarily being used for refinance or HELOC transactions, then the lending company should use an AVM that performs better with refinance transactions type of testing rather than use an AVM that performs well in purchase transactions only. So here we have two charts that show that in fact, some AVMs exhibit dramatically different rankings for purchase versus refinance transactions. So if you look at vendor A, that is shown by the red dot in the two charts, it consistently ranks at the top for both purchase and refinance transactions testing, while vendor B, shown by the orange dot, is a top performer for purchase transactions in the left chart, but it's a weak performer with refinance transactions in the right chart. So a lender would be served better by using vendor A rather than vendor B if their main use case is HELOCs or refis. And as the use of AVMs is expanding every day, it won't be too far of a stretch to say that AVMs will likewise be used in purchase transactions in the future. So if you have a model that performs well in both scenarios versus only one or the other, that would be a highly preferred AVM. So what this says is AVMs with the most accurate underlying models tend to exhibit superior performance in the case of refinance testing, as there are no sales prices or list prices in the pipeline that the AVMs can utilize in their models. Next slide. So coming to pre-listing testing, in this approach, the accuracy of an AVM is tested by comparing it to the final sale price, but its valuation is used from before the property was listed on the MLS. So let me explain this approach visually. If you look at the diagram at the bottom of the slide, a property is sold at point 4 in time, but instead of taking the AVM valuation at point 3, which is right before the property is sold, this testing approach takes AVM values at point 1 before the property is listed on the MLS, which is at point 2. So ideally, the AVM would have the best prediction at point 3 because it would have everything except for the sales price. And sometimes the time between point 2 and point 4 could be 30 days. Sometimes it could be 60 days. Sometimes it could be 9 months. And a lot could go on in that time period. So if you're using an AVM value that is 60 days old or 9 months old before a property is sold, that is what you're using in this type of testing. So this type of testing results in lower AVM accuracy compared to even refinance HELOC testing. And we have seen this in our own testing and heard from others that this accuracy could be as much as 10% lower compared to refi appraisal testing. And this lower accuracy arises because AVM used in refi testing are generally more current than those used in pre-MLS listing testing tests. So therefore, a cascade that is based on such testing, that is pre-MLS listing testing, where AVMs are being handcuffed and therefore result in lower accuracy, is doing a disservice to everybody. Also, this type of testing creates an uneven playing field between AVMs and other property valuation tools because other valuation tools may not be similarly constrained and they may have full access to all available and most current data sources, including list prices. Next slide, please. So should AVMs use list prices? This is a huge debate in the industry. Opponents of using MLS list price data argue that knowing the list price is like knowing the value of a property. So AVM should be tested in a way that removes the AVM's ability to utilize the list price. The argument for utilizing MLS list price in AVM models is simply that the accuracy of any statistical model, including AVMs, is directly linked to the quality and quality of data that the AVMs are allowed to use. And a model's accuracy is significantly enhanced if it has access to more timely, accurate, and relevant data. But even with all the data that is available, AVM modelers need to carefully consider which data sources to include, how much data to utilize, how to validate those chosen data sets, and which data to exclude. So when a property is listed on the MLS, there are all kinds of data, including photographs, property characteristics, and even location details such as views. These pictures that you see on the slide compare two distinct homes from the same neighborhood. Both were built in the same year and listed just within a month apart of each other. And the key difference is their condition, particularly the kitchens. One is updated, as you see in the top picture, and the other isn't updated, as in the bottom picture. So access to this kind of information on condition can be crucial for AVMs to generate precise value estimates. So if AVMs are denied access to list price information, they were not be able to access other data, such as condition on properties. So we agree list prices can serve as a helpful reference for valuation, but they are often highly subjective. Think about why a seller might overprice or underprice their home. Some sellers may list their properties at market value to facilitate a quick sale. Others may overprice them, believing their property is exceptional. And in contrast, some sellers may underprice their properties just to generate interest and potentially drive up the price through bidding wars. So this makes list prices unreliable proxies for actual sale prices, which can lead to inaccuracies in AVMs that either heavily or solely rely upon them. So here we have an example that was presented by opponents of using list price data in AVMs to argue for their case. This is an example of a property that was listed in February of 2024, and this property sold in May 2024 for $650,000. It was listed and sold at the same price. So the opponents claim that AVM values jumped in response to list prices. One AVM's valuation jumped in March, a month after the property was listed. Another AVM's valuation jumped in April, almost 2 months after the property was listed, while the third AVM's value did not jump at all. So AVM's values did not jump immediately after listing. It was after a few weeks or a couple of months. And typically what you see is that MLS data is updated daily and AVM estimates are updated at least weekly. So if these AVM estimates jumped in response to list prices, it likely should have happened in the month of February or early March. It is possible, however, that the AVM estimates jumped in response to AVM models being retrained or reweighted, or AVM estimates jumped due to economic shifts. Maybe AVM values were updated in response to other information that became available at the time of listing, such as condition. Or maybe AVM estimates jumped because information became available on a comparable sales after the property was listed. So it is entirely possible that these other factors were responsible for the jump in AVM estimates. There is no way of knowing what led to the change in AVM values. And this testing approach would deny an AVM all this useful information, including list prices. Also, when we are talking about approaches and recommendations, they should be based on detailed analyses and research and not based on a simple single example or with a single story. Next slide, please. So contrary to the previous example, I provide here an example that highlights the subjective nature of list prices. This is a study of highly similar homes in Jupiter, Florida. These homes were sold over a 12-month period between July 2023 and June 2024. These homes were built in 1985 and 1986 in a large planned community of hundreds of identical homes. They share the same floor plan and square footage, but differ only in condition or upgrades or location within the community. Also, these homes are located within around a half-mile radius of each other, and so they could easily be considered as comparable sales of one another. So despite the typical sale price of approximately $1 million, the list prices of these homes range from $900,000 to $1.5 million. For example, if you look at two properties highlighted in light blue at the top of the table, 101 Dunes Edge and 108 Seahorse, They were both listed at significantly different prices, one at around 1.5 million, the other at $900,000, but both sold within a month of each other for around $1 million. In contrast, 144 Sandpine, that is highlighted in orange, it was both listed and sold at $1.23 million. And this showcases an example of a property where the sale price was exactly equal to the list price. Here is another example to show that list prices can be very subjective. 132 Beach Summit and 132 Cape Point. They listed within a couple of weeks at almost the same price. They are highlighted in green. One sold within 2 months at just $20,000 below asking. The other sold after 4 months of listing at almost $100,000 below asking. Similarly, the homes at 230 Ridge and 226 River Park, highlighted in purple, they were listed within a day of each other, one at $950,000, the other at $975,000, but the selling prices differed by $100,000. So in this example, the sale to list price ratio varies from 67% all the way to 105%, and that is a fairly wide range. So if an AVM that relied on a simplistic model based on MLS list prices with just a haircut, it would not do too well in terms of accuracy. And this tells you about the importance of model accuracy in AVM performance, rather than just solely relying on knowledge of list prices. So knowing the list price is certainly not knowing the answer to the test. Therefore, if you have a test that is designed in such a way that purposely avoids and limits this type of information, contrary to best practices, will only lead to misleading results, and our opinion is not recommended. Next slide, please. So testing approaches also differ in terms of timing for obtaining AVM values. Typically, in purchase transactions testing, AVM vendors are expected to provide value estimates within a handful of days after they receive the test file. And this ensures that the values used for comparison are recent, just before a property is sold. In refi testing as well, the most recent AVM estimates are used for comparison with benchmark values that are usually appraisals. But a significant limitation of pre-MLS listing testing is the potential for outdated AVM valuations. Here you're comparing AVM estimates that are generated before a property is listed to its eventual sale price. And here the time between the two events, listing and selling, could be 30 days, it could be 90 days, it could be 9 months. And this method may not accurately reflect the model's performance in capturing real-time market dynamics. For example, consider a property listed in January 2024, and this property sold in June of the same year. An AVM estimate generated a value just prior to when the property was listed in January at $937,000. When you compare this estimate to the sale price of $850,000, this results in a 10.2% error. However, this type of assessment fails to account for the changing market conditions over the 5-month period between listing and sale of the property. This market, in fact, experienced a slowdown, in fact, even a slight depreciation during this time. So if the AVM were allowed to adjust its estimate based on the evolving market conditions, the error would likely decrease to only 2.5% because the pre-sale AVM estimate came in at $871,000. So if you're restricting the AVM to pre-listing estimates. This testing method handcuffs the AVM and penalizes the model's ability to consider more accurate data and also to adapt to market changes. And this is another reason why P10s will be significantly lower with pre-MLS listing testing versus purchase transactions testing or refi appraisal testing. So if you're trying to use the best AVM for a given geography, using this pre-MLS list price approach, you would be doing so with artificially high errors, and you hopefully would have attained the same cascade ranking as you would have if the errors were not artificially high, and that isn't even guaranteed. Next slide, please. So we also looked at all properties across the country that sold in the third quarter of 2024. That was around 1 million properties. We then looked at all properties that were listed for more than 90 days before they were sold. So the statistics that you see on this chart are based on nearly 170,000 properties. And for more than 38% of these properties, shown by the red bar, the sale price deviated from the list price by more than 10%. So if an AVM relied solely on list price as the property value, it would achieve a low accuracy. Next slide, please. There are other considerations as well with respect to the limitations of pre-MLS listing testing. As I mentioned earlier, there is more to the MLS listing of a property than just the list price, such as the condition of the property, the upgrades that have happened, and the views. The pre-MLS listing approach would not allow an AVM to use all this useful information. Additionally, pre-MLS listing testing disadvantages AVMs that have access to current and robust sources of data, AVMs who update their data frequently, and also employ advanced modeling techniques. So this then raises the question, does pre-MLS list price testing elevate the performance of an otherwise poor performing AVM? So if you are requiring an AVM value from 2 or 3 months prior, an AVM that doesn't update frequently, they wouldn't be penalized. The other consideration is, if we restrict list price data, what other valuable data sources might be next in line for exclusion? Should we also argue then for excluding, for example, county tax assessor data? The state of Washington assesses properties each year at market value, and they define market value as what a willing buyer would pay to a willing seller. The example you see here is the market value of a property was assessed by the county assessor in Washington at $856,000. And this property sold at $875,000. Here, the sale price was within 5% of the assessed price. So should we then argue that county assessor values be precluded from AVM models? And if we did that, then we would be using AVM values that would be perhaps a year old. So these are all important considerations. And is there a better way to perform AVM testing? Perhaps there is. From this discussion on the various testing approaches, we conclude that the timing of the test matters and the amount of information available to AVMs matters, and these are important considerations in ensuring accurate evaluation. But the question is there a better way? Or at the very least, are there alternatives that may provide new or different insights? So we put forward one such alternative. I want to point out that we do not take full credit for it. One key issue in AVM validation has always been trying to optimize the timing for obtaining an AVM estimate relative to the home selling and loan manufacturing processes. So a proposed to-be approach by us is based on testing the AVM at the time when it would be used in a real application. So in this approach, an AVM value is pulled at the time of loan application in both purchase transactions as well as refinance or HELOC transactions. Perhaps we can refer to it as loan application testing. This would ensure there are no sales prices in the pipeline to be consumed in the case of purchase transactions. This would allow AVMs to provide their most up-to-date value estimates at the time of the mortgage application. So yes, this approach would allow AVMs to incorporate list prices in purchase transactions. But as we have shown, knowing the list price doesn't necessarily equate to knowing the final sale prices. Also, testers and lenders can evaluate over-reliance of an AVM on list prices, and they could do so, for example, by measuring the percentage of AVM outputs within, say, +2 - of the list price. So in this loan application testing, model evaluation would be based on robustness and not on data restriction. Finally, our goal with this research is to further this debate on testing methods, to challenge current assumptions, and perhaps even raise new questions. Thank you, and I'm going to turn this over to Eric for a discussion on the other interagency rules on AVMs.
All right, thank you very much, Rena. And just want a quick thumbs up from Marissa that you can hear me okay. Okay, thank you. So as Rena mentioned earlier, this is her discussion was really part of just Rule 4 regarding AVM testing, but there are 4 other rules which we wanted to mention in completeness for the webinar today. And the first one is that all AVMs estimates have a high level of confidence. And so today, AVMs are tested on many metrics. You can see hit rates, P10s, which Rena mentioned earlier, but there are many others, such as median absolute error, mean absolute error, percentage of valuations that are more than 25% above the benchmark, below the benchmark, et cetera. One troublesome metric has always been the confidence score. And the troublesome part of it is not that the confidence scores are bad, but that oftentimes they're different AVM to AVM. Veros, for example, uses a confidence score that ranges between 1 and 99, 99 being the most accurate, 1 being the least accurate, and there's a quantifiable definition in between. Well, some AVMs may not even have a 1 to 99 score. They may use ABCD. Some may use high, medium, low. Others may use a 1 to 99 score, but what their 92 means is different than what our 92 means. So it makes it difficult for users or consumers of those different AVMs to compare them easily. Well, fortunately, MISMO has been working quite extensively here over the past several months through their AVM development working group, and they're currently working on 3 different standards. One has already been released, and that is the standard on common confidence scores, and it's meant to address rule number 1. So it recommends a confidence score called the common confidence score, so that if it is likewise on a scale from 1 to 99, but there's a very specific definition. So if one AVM has a 92, it means the same thing as another AVM that has a 92. And what we hope to see is that all AVMs will start to use this new definition of common confidence score in their AVM outputs. Next slide, please. Rule number 2 is the protection against data manipulation. So this rule involves ensuring that physical access to the data is limited. So modelers can model the data, but can't change the data. Obviously, all different AVM providers have different firewalls to prevent a modeler, for example, from going in and just changing data in the database. So the database team has the responsibility for performing the QC checks prior to loading the data in the database for use in the modeling. And that's precisely what we do at Veros as well. So there's many different approaches to that across different AVMs. Next slide. So avoiding conflicts of interest. So this is just ensuring there's a strict process in place where a third party cannot influence the valuation. I can attest at Veros what we do, and a lot of times this comes to a customer in terms of an attestation that's done for the AVM. But a third party can certainly request us to look at the valuation if they feel there's an issue, but they cannot directly influence a value being changed. And a lot of times what will happen is a customer might say something like, oh, we see an issue with the valuation. I see the problem. The square footage is off by 300 square feet. We'll send you documentation showing that it's really 300 square feet larger. That can then be updated. We then notify our data provider that there was an error. That gets changed, and then the database gets changed subsequent to that. So there's a pretty extensive process. The third party can't just say, we'd like the value to be $25,000 larger. Next slide. So number 4, this has been discussed extensively. So just to show for completeness, we show that here. So next slide. So for disparate impact, this at the bottom line means that the inputs to an AVM do not contain any reference to demographic data, race, gender, any protected class for any real estate transaction. And again, a lot of times there's an attestation involved here. There is a data dictionary that's sometimes requested by a customer to ensure that those data variables are not in the database. This is also going to be one of the third MISMO standard will be worked here shortly. In what is the best way to test for disparate impact in AVM values? And our AVM, I can just comment on briefly, has been tested for fairness and disparate impact. And the approach is essentially by ensuring that the errors, such as a typical error, such as a typical median absolute error, for example, or large undervaluations or large undervaluations, say the percentage of valuations that are more than 15% overvalued or 15% undervalued. We just want to make sure those don't correlate with any variables or that are correlated to protected classes such as ethnicity. We want to make sure that an undervaluation percentage is essentially flat across whatever the ethnicity percentage happens to be in a given localized area.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you both, Rena and Eric. This webinar has been extremely insightful. Really great information. Thank you both so much. So I want to go ahead and transition into the Q&A portion. We have a little bit of time, but we are running out. So we have received some great questions already. So let's go ahead and explore a few of those. So let me take a look here. So one of the questions that has come in says, some voices in the industry are questioning the use of refi appraisals as benchmarks. What is your position on this?
I can take that question.
Okay, great.
Thank you for this great question. This is a really important consideration in terms of AVM testing. So first, I think I have mentioned all these points during my presentation. So first of all, currently, the use of AVMs that is the most is mostly for refis and HELOC transactions. So because the most use case is for these transactions, you want an AVM that performs well for these types of transactions. So it is necessary to test an AVM for both purchase transactions and refis, because there could be AVMs that don't do too well with refi testing, and they may do very well with purchase transactions. So if you're using an AVM that is doing great with purchase transactions, but not with refis, then that cannot be a good tool for a lender. I mean, if an AVM's P10 value goes from, say, 95% for purchase transactions to 50% for refis and appraisal testing, then it is a cause for concern for the lender. Also, since no property sales occurs for refis or HELOCs, many large lenders actually consider appraisals to be the gold standard. So I hope I have answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you so much. Let's see, we have time for one more question here that's come in. So let me take a look here. So we have another great question. So you say that AVM's accuracy declines with pre-MLS listing testing, but the accuracy of all AVMs declines. So how does that matter? Is the question. Who wants to take that?
I guess I can try that one, Marissa. So with pre-MLS listing testing, AVMs are not really allowed to use all the data that's available, like Rena said during the presentation. So they're essentially using a restricted valuation. So that's why the accuracy such as a P10 would be lower. Once they are allowed to use all the data, then the rankings could change. So, you know, I kind of maybe liken it to, you know, I don't know, a race perhaps where, you know, you've got, you know, kids that are going to run a lap around the track at a high school race. And the coach is trying to figure out, you know, which is my top runner, which is my second best runner, so I know who to race. And then the coach recognizes, well, gosh, some of these runners have, you know, $500 tennis shoes, and some of these runners have $25 tennis shoes, and that's not really fair, because $500 shoes, they'll probably run better. So the coach, in an effort to be as fair as possible, says, you know what, I want to level the playing field for this race. I want to make sure that nobody has an advantage due to, you know, better tennis shoes than somebody else. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to want to have everybody run barefoot. And so we'll conduct the race having everybody run barefoot. And then whoever's the winner of that race will declare as the fastest runner. Well, is that going to be the correct ranking of the fastest runner in that example? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, I know if I were to run barefoot, I wouldn't even finish the race. If I had on really nice tennis shoes, I would do okay. So that would be a concern for me. And that's the same thing we're doing with testing AVMs in a highly restrictive environment and hoping that the ranking's going to be the same based on the lower performance statistics. AVMs that update their data infrequently and have poor MLS list price models. And what would be a poor MLS list price model? A poor MLS list price model would be my AVM value equals the list price. That would be an example of a poor MLS list price model. So if an AVM updated their data infrequently and had a poor MLS list price model, they would have their ranking improved in such a pre-MLS list price testing scenario. And AVMs that update their data frequently, such as every day, and had sophisticated MLS list price models would be disadvantaged. So think about it for a minute. If you know you have an MLS list price and it's been on the market for 3 days, and you have an MLS list price that's been on the market for 9 months, like Rena's example, do you think that the property that had been on the market for 3 days could sell for full list price? Sure. Is there any chance that that property that's been on the market for 9 months is going to sell for list price? No way. So why are we proposing to do such an approach? We don't quite follow that. And the other thing we are continually looking at is why are we proposing to disadvantage only AVMs, but not other valuation approaches? And if we look at an appraiser, what is the appraiser allowed to see? The appraiser can see the pending contract sales price. The appraiser can see the MLS list price, etc. So why is the AVM being the one to be disadvantaged? So that's a little puzzling to us as well.
Wow, thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. That was extremely insightful. I really appreciate that. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. We are very, very close to time. So if you didn't get to your, if we didn't get to your question, do not worry. We'll be following up with answers directly after the webinar. So we will get to your questions. But before we do close, we'd like to thank everyone again. Thank you all so much for attending and engaging with us. And we really hope that today's session helps you gain a clearer, more data-driven perspective on AVM testing and evaluation. So just as a reminder, we'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to the full webinar recording, a copy of today's presentation slides, and most importantly, the AVM testing methodologies paper that we discussed today. So thanks again for spending a part of your day with us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to connecting with you all very soon. So thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.